Hey team, some call this a skateboard, others call it a midlife crisis. In this case, I would say both are correct. This is clearly not the usual furniture restoration or makeover that you would usually see on my channel, but I think you'll be able to tell by the look on my face that this needs to happen, folks. I'm an 80s baby and I couldn't let this slice of good old days pass me by. It's definitely in need of an overhaul, so I figure I'll apply the same techniques I use for furniture and inject a bit of my own personality into this board. I'll start by attempting to dismantle it. I even got this fancy skateboard tool off Amazon, so I really feel the part. I know I will get the avid skaters who'll probably be shedding a few tears that I'm giving this a makeover, but I promise I let this sit on eBay for many days before I purchased it for a dismal £19, and that was including shipping, so I think it's safe to say I don't think it's particularly valuable. I couldn't get these back nuts off as I didn't have a tool that was deep enough. So I looked on YouTube for some advice, and I did find a video that recommended taking two flathead screwdrivers and creating some pressure in between the two for leverage. Believe it or not, it actually works. Most of these bits and pieces are in pretty good nick. A couple of small breaks that I'll fix with some super glue, a few deep scuffs here and there. They also need a good clean, but otherwise I think they're in pretty good shape. Fortunately, the grip comes off pretty easily. Now, I did want to scrape the paint off, but due to the curvature of the board and obviously the straight blade on my scraper, that wasn't going to work too well. I'd end up really badly damaging it. So I opt for chemical stripper instead. And like always, I recommend to go over with some 60 grit sandpaper to give the chemical stripper a head start. I find it helps the stripper seep in a little bit, and I've had lots of feedback that people have found that tip really useful, so definitely give it a go. I leave the stripper to do its thing for about 30 minutes before scraping it off. As the paint's coming off, you can see the wood underneath isn't in the best condition, but I'm not expecting to make this look brand new. I obviously still want it to have that vintage vibe about it. After the stripper's done its thing, I clean it over with hot soapy water, and I actually just use dishwashing detergent. After it's dried off, you can see the shadows of the previous artwork are still there, but I'm sure with a bit of sandpaper we will get that off. I'm now going to get stuck into fixing up some of the lifted plywood. And for that I just use some wood glue. There are a few nicks here and there that I'd like to fix up. Being a skateboard and the likelihood that it will take a beating, I don't use the general wood filler that I normally would use. I'm going to use a high performance wood filler that uses a hardener to give a really strong fill. You do have to work pretty quickly, but once you get the hang of it, it is quite easy to work with. I fill some of the larger voids with wooden offcuts to help fill the gaps rather than just bog them up with filler. I decided to go over the board with some oxalic acid to see if I can get rid of some of the staining and discoloration. I use almost boiling water, oxalic acid powder, and then apply it to the board. If you're wondering why I use such a small brush, I am too. Be sure to thoroughly wash it off with water once the acid has dried out. Now that this repair is dry, I'm going to continue on with it. I use my saw to cut off the excess wood, and I go over it with my orbital sander just to round it off. There are a few gaps, so I'm going to go at it with a bit more of the wood filler. I'm now going to give the nuts and bolts a good going over with Barkeeper's Friend. That just helps remove any rust and clean them up. I have changed the water here, this is not a magic trick. I also apply a little bit of black paint to the heads just to give them a nice tidy look once they're back on the board, and I spray them with some Rust-Oleum clear sealer. As you can see, this repair has come up pretty good. I've even given it a sand down and shaped it, so if this board was painted all one colour, you probably wouldn't even know these repairs were there. I then sand the whole board down with a final 220 grit sandpaper. I really want to add some awesome artwork to this board, but sadly I'm not the most amazing painter. Although I do have another trick up my sleeve, I'm going to add some artwork using this Laser Picker 4. This is a portable dual laser that allows you to create artworks on all sorts of material, but today I'm going to be using it on wood, and I want to create a graphic in the center on the top of the board. Normally you would just place the material directly underneath, but unfortunately the width of the board is too wide, and that means I won't be able to get it centered. But this laser is super mobile and can be used in lots of different ways, so I just remove the internal base plate and lift the laser up and place it directly on top of the skateboard. I measure up exactly where I want the artwork to go so I can make sure I've got the laser correctly lined up and in the perfect position. Another awesome thing about the Laser Picker is that it can be operated straight from your mobile phone using their free app. You don't need to have a computer. You can simply import all of your artwork, resize it, make sure it's sitting right in the correct parameters for the laser bed before you hit go. And once you're happy, you can either hit the start button on your phone or on the device itself. You can see here we're about 26 minutes in and we've done about 75% of the job. So for such a detailed result, I don't think that's too bad at all. I'm really happy with that. I'll talk a little bit more about why I've chosen this artwork shortly. I continue adding a few other things to the face of the board. Some of the more difficult spots I use the handheld function, which is very convenient. You can see here I've also put some artwork on the back of the board. Now all of this artwork resonates with me because I am a sucker for any memorabilia from childhood. About 12 years ago I had a coffee shop in Australia called Decked, which in hindsight wasn't the best name, especially with my Kiwi accent. But I basically filled it with my favourite childhood memories, including all the tables. They were packed with things like cassette tapes and records, marbles, matchbox cars, all those fun things that you will most likely recognise. And my lowrider bike used to sit out the front, parked up at the door. I was very proud of it. So yeah, now you can see the theme of this board. With these marbles, I really want to give them a little bit of colour, so I'm going to put this laser to the test and attempt some veneer inlay. Not usually the easiest thing to do, but with this laser it ended up being quite easy. I can create an outline of the image that I originally did, and rather than engrave it, I'll use the laser to cut the veneer. As you can see, it's done a pretty amazing job. This veneer is super fine and it's pretty much cut it perfectly with minimal burn lines. I am, however, a little bit unsure if it now looks too busy with 3 different types of veneer, and I'm thinking perhaps I'll just stick with one variety of wood. Let me know what you would have done here, but I have decided to stay with one variety. I use wood glue to stick it down, ensuring that I put plenty on there so the full piece of veneer is covered, and then I cover it up with some tape just to flatten it out while it dries out. After about an hour, I remove the tape and see how it's looking, and I am extremely happy. So I take to it with some sandpaper to level the veneer out with the rest of the board and get a nice flush, smooth finish. That is looking really cool. So now it is time to stain the board. But before I do that, I'm going to use some pre-stain wood conditioner just to ensure the stain goes on nice and evenly. I let it soak in for about 5 minutes before removing the excess and allow it to dry for a further 30 minutes. Because there are still a lot of age-related imperfections and repairs in the board, I decided to go with a darker stain. I also think this will work better with the lime green hardware. Dark oak is too dark, so I mix it with a natural oak to get my ideal colour. I apply a second slightly darker coat with fine steel wool for that super smooth finish. I use a little paint to disguise some of the lighter filled areas. And a little superglue repair on the plastic. The rest of the hardware gets a hot, soapy bath. I finished the board with hard wax oil. If you're familiar with my content, you will know this is now my go-to. I love working with it. I applied 2 coats with a 400 grit sand in between coats, and it leaves me with a water-resistant, hard-wearing and super smooth finish. Once dry, it's time for me to apply the new grip to the board, something I have never done before. I remove my wedding band so as not to scratch it up, and I roughly cut it to shape and attempt to stick it on. It's actually quite forgiving when lining it up and isn't too difficult to apply. No idea why I didn't put gloves on. It tends to bite. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've been here before, thank you for your continued support. If you're new here and you like this content, please consider subscribing. I'd absolutely appreciate it. A like, a comment, all goes a long way. Thanks a lot. Actually not too bad for my first attempt, and I used the scraps to tidy up the edges. I think we are now at a point where we can put it all back together. The bearings were a little dirty, but nothing a little elbow grease couldn't fix. Not entirely sure how to reassemble this part, so I better ask someone who does. So that is how it is done, folks. You cannot beat a demonstration from the boss. It's not perfect, but I'm pretty chuffed with it. Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, take it easy.